You look at an exchange like the LBMA, Andy, and it's the most widely traded exchange on the planet. 8.1% of the entire silver float was delivered off the exchange in the month of August. So these countries are also draining our exchanges by using the suppression of the Western paper market in an effort to drain the exchanges. And this is something that I think you will start to see accelerate in a meaningful way. You will begin to see the silver market. Sorry about that. Every time I start a podcast, my dogs want to say hello. But you will begin to see things happen like central banks openly admitting that they are taking possession of metal and purchasing it, let alone the opaque manner in which they've been doing it all along. And people will wake up to this realization that, my goodness, these players have been buying for a long time when it finally comes out that it's obvious. Because if you were trying to reposition yourself out of dollars and treasuries like we're seeing, and instead of recycling into treasuries, recycling into commodities, it would do you're doing yourself a disservice to tell the world about it. You want to accumulate as much as you can before we see this revaluation, before we see the drive to accumulate metals. And you could say the exact same thing about the West. Now, I'm not saying we're accumulating it, but why don't we ever talk about how much gold we have at Fort Knox? Why do we not audit it? Why, when Ron Paul wants to audit it, is it shut down? So I guess what I'm saying is all of these countries have vested interest in keeping quiet about the real numbers. Want to let us on to, yeah, we're getting some, but this is the first time I've seen a central bank come out and say, silver is now going to be accumulated as a priority and in an asset that I view as the most undervalued on the planet, for real, on every level: supply, demand, and increased usage in green, digital, military, you name it. It's a big deal for silver. It's a very big deal for a market that is trading massively rehypothecated, where on the LBMA, and I'll shut up and listen to what you have to say about this, but on the LBMA, they have openly admitted recently that, look, they say we have 800 million ounces of silver, of which 500 million belong to the ETFs. 300 million is the float. It's the lowest amount they've had since they've started keeping records ever. And this is a 140-year-old exchange. I don't know how far back their record keeping goes, but what I am saying is they openly admit to trading 292 million ounces of silver per day of 300 million every day, 5 days a week. But the interesting thing about that number is they also say, well, that number's 10 times understated because we only report the final settlement numbers, not all the trades that it took to get there. And so you're talking trading 2.9 billion with a B ounces of silver per day, 3.5 times the annual global mine supply, which is 90+% paper sold by the bullion banks that have a vested interest in suppressing the price and have for a long time. And these countries, namely India, Russia, and China, have realized it doesn't take missiles and stealth bombers to beat the United States. What it takes is accessing the back door that no one ever did. No one ever stood for delivery my whole career. Nobody did. And now we see 8.1% of the entire silver float on the LBMA delivered in the month of August. How much longer, when they tell us it's the lowest amount they've ever had on record, how much longer can they take that? And this is why those countries who know what we're doing, they understand what we're doing, even the new BRICS grain exchange, the guy who's running it said, we produce and consume more wheat than the West does, but the price is controlled on COMEX. And when this new exchange is in place, that will change. They know what we're doing on all of the world's commodities. We control it, we suppress it. We can make oil -40 a barrel like we did in 2020. All of this plays right into the hands of the global South, who's using that suppression and other means, and now openly talking about it, to drain the shelves of what is, I think, the most important thing in the world to do, and that is to accumulate commodities in favor of treasuries. And we're seeing that happen in a massive pace.
When we talk about gold and silver, we're not just discussing precious metals. We're discussing the backbone of an impending shift in global economic power. The speaker, Andy Schectman, breaks down the fascinating and downright alarming facts of what is happening behind closed doors. And trust me, this is one conversation you don't want to miss. Now let's get into it. One of the most fascinating things that Andy brings up is how the LBMA, London Bullion Market Association, and other Western exchanges have consistently manipulated the price of silver and gold through paper markets. To put it simply, these are trades made without ever physically delivering the metal. It's like selling a house multiple times but never handing over the keys. The LBMA claims to hold around 800 million ounces of silver, with 500 million tied up in ETFs, exchange-traded funds. That leaves a measly 300 million ounces in circulation. Here's the kicker. They trade 292 million ounces of silver per day. Yes, per day. So in essence, they are trading almost their entire physical inventory daily. And here's the darker side. This is only a fraction of the actual number of trades. According to Andy, the real number is understated by 10 times. That's 2.9 billion ounces of silver traded daily in a world where the entire annual global mine supply barely touches 900 million ounces. Think about that. We're looking at 3.5 times the global annual silver supply being traded every single day. It's not even close to sustainable. This is all orchestrated by bullion banks with a vested interest in keeping silver prices low. Why? Because they profit off the paper trading, while countries like Russia, India, and China are silently draining the West vaults of their actual physical silver. It's not just silver. The same thing is happening with gold. But here's where things get really exciting. Now, Andy talks about countries like Russia and China who are quietly stacking physical commodities. And they're not just buying in small amounts, they're hoarding it. In fact, 8.1% of the entire silver float was delivered off the LBMA in just 1 month, August 2024. That's more than we've ever seen before. It's no secret anymore. The BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, are shifting away from the US dollar and treasuries, and they're doing so by stockpiling gold, silver, platinum, and palladium. Let's pivot to gold for a minute. While the West has focused on quantitative easing and stock market manipulation, central banks, particularly those of China and Russia, have been stockpiling gold at unprecedented rates. China in particular has been buying gold for decades, though they've been suspiciously quiet about it. For years, they reported their reserves as stuck at 1,200 tons, a number that nobody believed. And then, in the last 18 months, they've suddenly started reporting a monthly increase. But don't be fooled. Andy points out that the real accumulation is happening through their proxy banks. These institutions are buying directly from refiners in places like South Africa and Switzerland, deals that aren't being reported to the IMF. Even Saudi Arabia has been caught doing this. Recently, they imported 160 metric tons of gold from Switzerland, an amount that wasn't reported to the IMF. This quiet, under-the-table accumulation speaks volumes. They're preparing for a seismic shift in the global financial system, one where commodities, not fiat currencies, will be king. Speaking of under-the-radar gold dealings, let's talk about the United States. Did you know the US hasn't conducted a public audit of its gold reserves since the 1950s? That's right. No one really knows how much gold we actually have in Fort Knox. Politicians like Ron Paul have called for audits, but those efforts have been consistently shut down. Why? What are they hiding? If gold is so irrelevant, as the Federal Reserve would have you believe, why do they go to such lengths to keep it secret? It's all part of the same game, keeping gold and silver prices suppressed while the smart money in smart countries are quietly accumulating it. Because when the curtain finally drops and people realize that the dollar is losing its reserve status, it's going to be a mad dash for commodities.
What I have witnessed over the last couple of years, and you're right, it is scary. You know, I've been doing this for a long time. No one ever tells you about the things they got wrong. And certainly I've gotten plenty wrong. But seeing the crumbs that have been laid at my feet and everyone's feet since 2019, 2020, putting them together, going out on a limb publicly and saying it and watching it happen has, on one hand, been kind of exhilarating. Yeah, I got it right. On the other hand, it's very frightening as a father of 3 kids watching the world unfold in less than an ideal manner. As we take a look at everything unfolding, we see the central banks, as you mentioned, who have been buying gold and silver at a level really the world's never seen before. Much of this accumulation has been done on the sly. You look at, and I'll get to your question, but I want to lay the foundation. You look at Saudi Arabia, they got caught importing 160 metric tons of gold, didn't report it to the IMF, but the import-export numbers caught it coming out of Switzerland. Oh, we made a mistake, so to speak. China has been buying gold for as long as I've been doing this for 35 years. And all along, their numbers were stuck at 1,200 metric tons. Everyone said you can never believe anything they say. Then they start accumulating more over the last 18 months in a row or whatnot of positive figures in accumulation, and then they stop for a few months, and everyone's saying, look, the Chinese have stopped. No, they haven't. They're buying it through a proxy bank, like the PBOC uses commercial banks to buy directly from the refiners in South Africa and Switzerland. That doesn't get reported to the IMF. If the PLC, the People's Liberation Army, buys on behalf of the country, they don't report it to the IMF. China's flying all around the world buying unrefined doré bars, concentrate in silver, paying double what the Western refiners or the Western companies will pay for it, and bringing it back and refining it themselves. That doesn't get accounted or reported to the IMF. And so when we talk about the amount of, and by the way, China is the second largest producer of silver in the world. And so all of these countries, and Russia included, not only do they understand the importance of commodities in this new system we're moving into, where he or she who has the commodities makes the rules, but they're also trying to accumulate more than they're letting onto in a very big way. India has imported 850 million ounces of silver over the last couple of years, and you got dig to try and find it. They've probably imported a lot more. And so what I'm getting at is that to see a country like Russia come out and say that they are going to start to accumulate platinum, palladium, and silver, it's the first time I've ever seen a country actually mention silver in terms of their stockpile. You know, we see them accumulating it. We see China accumulating it. We see India accumulating it. None of them ever made a declaration that indeed this is what we are doing. And so when you realize that these countries have been accumulating in massive quantity, where, as I said, China's buying unrefined silver directly from the miners, paying double what the West will in Latin America, so they can bring it home and refine it, and it's kind of off the exchanges, no one sees it. This is emblematic of what we should expect to see all around the world, and now you have a country come out and actually say, we're going to start accumulating silver. It's the first I've seen of it.
Here's a thought for you. Imagine waking up one day and seeing a tweet from a major central bank that reads, "We've been buying silver for months, and now it's our primary reserve asset." How do you think the markets would react? I'll tell you, silver prices would skyrocket. But here's the thing, you probably won't see that tweet. Central banks don't want you to know what they're doing until they've already accumulated enough. It's the same reason you won't hear them talking about how much gold they've bought. They're playing the long game, and they don't want to tip their hand. So what does this mean for you? Well, if you're holding on to dollars or other fiat currencies, you're sitting on a depreciating asset. The real smart move, as Andy points out, is to start accumulating gold and silver before the rest of the world catches on. In the hierarchy of commodities, silver stands out as the most undervalued. Andy calls it the most undervalued asset on the planet, and he's not exaggerating. Look at the fundamentals: shrinking supply, rising demand from green energy, solar panels, electric vehicles, and relentless suppression in the paper markets. The green revolution alone is going to drive up silver demand like never before. Photovoltaic cells used in solar panels are heavily reliant on silver, and as countries push for more renewable energy, the demand will only grow. Electric vehicles also require significantly more silver than traditional cars due to their extensive electrical systems. But here's the kicker. Despite all of this, silver is still trading at prices that don't reflect its true value. Once the manipulation stops, and the paper markets can no longer suppress prices, we could easily see silver shoot past $100 an ounce. That might sound like a stretch, but when you look at the fundamentals, it's not just possible, it's probable. So where does this leave you? If you're watching this, you already have a head start. You're aware of the manipulation, the silent accumulation by foreign governments, and the inevitable collapse of the current financial system. Now's the time to act. Whether you're buying gold, silver, or even other commodities like platinum and palladium, you're positioning yourself to not only survive but thrive in the new economy. And for those of you thinking, well, maybe I'll wait until the prices start going up, here's my advice. Don't. By the time the mainstream media starts reporting on what's happening, it'll already be too late. The smart money's already moving, and you should be too. One of the most significant issues Andy Schectman highlights is the sheer volume of paper silver being traded daily compared to the actual physical supply. On the London Bullion Market Association, they trade 292 million ounces of silver per day, 5 days a week. That's almost the entire available float of 300 million ounces being traded every single day. But it gets even more mind-boggling when you factor in that this figure is understated by a factor of 10, meaning the real number is closer to 2.9 billion ounces of silver traded daily. To put this in perspective, the total annual global silver mine supply is around 900 million ounces. This means that in one day, the LBMA trades over 3 times the entire annual silver supply. This is not just unsustainable, it's a ticking time bomb. The system is predicated on the assumption that not everyone will demand physical delivery. But what happens when they do? Well, we're already starting to see cracks in the facade. In August 2024, 8.1% of the entire silver float was delivered off the London Bullion Market Association. That's a staggering amount, and it's a sign that countries and institutions are beginning to realize the jig is up. The moment more people start demanding physical delivery, the entire house of cards will come crashing down. For years, central banks have been quietly accumulating gold, but now for the first time, we're seeing a public acknowledgement of silver accumulation as well. Russia recently announced that it would begin accumulating silver as a priority, along with platinum and palladium. This is a significant shift, as no country has ever openly declared silver as a strategic reserve asset before. What's driving this change? For one, silver is an essential metal for the green energy transition. Solar panels, electric vehicles, and numerous other technologies rely on silver for their production. As the world moves toward renewable energy, the demand for silver is going to skyrocket. But it's not just about green energy. Silver is also a critical metal for military applications in the digital economy. Its conductivity and reflective properties make it indispensable in everything from smartphones to missiles. In short, silver is a metal that's crucial for the future, and countries like Russia and China are positioning themselves to dominate the market. China's approach to gold and silver accumulation is nothing short of brilliant. For years, they reported their gold reserves as being stuck at 1,200 metric tons, a figure that everyone in the industry knew was a lie. Then over the past 18 months, they started reporting monthly increases in their gold reserves. But here's the thing. The real accumulation is happening through proxy banks that buy directly from refiners in places like South Africa and Switzerland. China is also one of the world's largest producers of silver, and they're using this to their advantage. They've been quietly buying unrefined silver from Latin America, paying double what Western refiners are willing to pay. This silver is then refined in China and added to their strategic reserves. None of this is reported to the IMF, so the true extent of China's silver holdings is a mystery. But why all the secrecy? Because China knows that once the world realizes how much gold and silver they've accumulated, it will trigger a rush to commodities that will send prices skyrocketing. They want to accumulate as much as possible before the rest of the world catches on. While the BRICS nations are quietly amassing gold and silver, the West continues to rely on paper markets and fiat currencies. The US dollar has been the world's reserve currency for decades, but its dominance is being challenged. Countries like China, Russia, and India are actively working to reduce their reliance on the dollar, and they're doing so by building up their reserves of physical commodities. In the West, we've been led to believe that fiat currencies are the ultimate store of value. But history tells a different story. Every fiat currency in history has eventually collapsed, and there's no reason to believe the US dollar will be any different. When the dollar finally loses its reserve status, those holding physical gold and silver will be the ones who come out on top. But here's the problem. The West has neglected its gold and silver reserves. The US hasn't conducted a public audit of its gold reserves since the 1950s, and no one really knows how much gold we actually have in Fort Knox. Meanwhile, central banks in the BRICS nations are buying gold and silver at an unprecedented rate. They understand that in the new global financial system, he who controls the commodities controls the game. The smart money is already moving, and you should be too. Whether you're buying physical bullion, investing in mining stocks, or even looking into other commodities like platinum and palladium, now is the time to act. The world is changing, and those who hold tangible assets will be the ones who come out on top. Andy Schectman has laid out a compelling case for why gold and silver are the most undervalued assets on the planet right now. The paper markets can only suppress prices for so long, and when the system finally collapses, those holding physical metals will be the ones who emerge victorious. Don't wait until it's too late. The signs are all around us. Central banks are accumulating, countries are shifting away from the dollar, and the supply of silver and gold is shrinking. Now is the time to act. Start accumulating gold and silver today, because when the revaluation comes, you'll be glad you did.